photography final presentation. To begin with, we're going to talk a little bit about light. So there are many things that make up light in a photograph. Those things are aperture, ISO, and shutter speed. And the aperture helps control the amount of light and also the depth of field and focus. In this image, the ISO we used was actually a low ISO, approximately 100. This is because it was a sunny day. And then for the shutter speed, I used a lower shutter speed. This allows more exposure to the light, and that is also good for a still subject. This is a great example of hard light. So with hard light, we are able to see strong dark shadows, and again, this was a sunny day, and that is normally when you're able to see that type of light. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about composition. So composition is what makes up your photos, and there are a lot of different elements that go into that, one of which is going to be balance and symmetry. So this image is a great example of asymmetry. This is used to create visual weight. You can tell because the main flower is found in the center of the image. However, the other flower added to the left-hand side of the image helps to add a bit of asymmetry to help keep the photo more interesting. We can also see that there is a dark background and a light foreground, and it's important that you have to have a neutral sort of midground, which in this case is going to be the leaves. And then another thing that helps to add to the composition of the photo is the texture. So this photo has a lot of texture. You can see the texture on the petals as well as inside of the flower, and then also the texture of the leaves in the background. And then the depth of field is created by the flowers being at the forefront and in focus, and then the background being blurred helps to create that depth. And then also the size of the flowers is really important because the flowers themselves are made very large. It helps the audience know that that's really important and something that we should be paying attention to. Next, let's talk a little bit about perspective. So an important thing to know is that with perspective, there's always a vanishing point, which is where our parallel lines are going to meet, and they always meet along the horizon line. Now, there are three different types of perspective. There's first point, 1 point perspective, 2 point perspective, and 3 point perspective. With 1 point perspective, we're only focusing on length. With 2 point perspective, we are focused on length and width, and then 3 point perspective, length, width, and height. This is a clear example of 2 point perspective because in this image, we are able to see both length and width, and you can see that they converge at a corner. I also particularly like this image because there's a lot of balance to it. So on the left-hand side, you can see all of the color that was created by the mural, and then on the right-hand side, the juxtaposition of having a gray wall helps to create a lot of contrast in the image to help keep it visually appealing. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about black and white. So the main intention of black and white, I feel, is to draw emotion. And so I think that this is a really great example. It helped the tunnel seem a little more ominous. Also, these are very shallow in person. However, by creating the black and white, it helps black out the tunnels and remove the audience's ability to see how deep they are, which actually makes the image a little more ominous. And that is the intention behind these types of filters, is to help add emotion in a place that there might not be otherwise. Moving on to portraits, there's a lot to know about portraits. One of the most to keeping your images visually appealing is going to be the rule of thirds. So as you can see in this image, the main subject is placed in the right-hand side of the image. The rule of thirds essentially means that you break your image up into 3 categories horizontally and then also vertically. And then you try to keep your subject in one of those thirds to help make it more visually interesting. And here my subject is in the right third of the image. This is also an example of 1 point perspective, so we are only focused on the length of the hallway here, and then This is another great way to show depth of field as well. Instead of putting into focus the person in the foreground and blurring out the people in the background, there is just space in between the two, which helps there to be a size comparison so that we can see that the person in the foreground is closer because they're larger versus the people in the background being farther away because they're smaller. And then something else that helps with our depth of field is going to be the leading lines of the hallway walls that help to converge at the end, and then also the tiles will help us show some space and depth. And that is actually all I have for you today, so thank you so much for listening and for this opportunity for me to learn a little bit more about photography.